Hey, Wes here. Thanks for joining me today. And today we're going to turn the clock back 4,000 to 5,000 years. And we're going across the pond to Europe to build a Bell Beaker pot. This is really a pretty famous style of pottery that was during the Bronze Age. And so today the video is going to be a bit longer than usual because I'm going to show a full build. This is a project that most anybody can do because it's not overly complicated or sophisticated. But it's certainly a lot of fun. So I will explain more along the way. Let's get started. Here is the plan, my Bell Beaker. I've been looking forward to this project for quite a long time. So I'm looking forward to getting started with this. What I have is just a chunk of clay. This is wild clay, mixture of a couple different kinds of clay that I got in Arizona. It has 20%, about 20% sand temper in it. So these pots were found all over Europe, and so I'm sure that they used a really wide variety of clay. There wasn't anything, I don't think, particularly special about that. And in many ways, these pots were formed in a pretty similar way to the pots in the desert Southwest. So they're hand-built, they're a coil pot, maybe a coil and scrape, maybe they used an anvil and paddle, don't know for sure. What I've seen, though, is that they seem to be just a hand-built, scraped kind of a thing. And a good project for kind of a beginner because they're not finely finished. And you'll see how that all goes in the end. We don't have to worry about a high polish or anything like that. The outside was a little bit on the rough side. So I'm starting with, and I usually don't do it this way, but basically making a bit of a pinch pot, and then I will just kind of pull it up. The other thing, these were not really fine, thin kinds of pots. From what I've seen, somewhere between 1/4 of an inch and 3/8 of an inch thick. This clay is a little bit on the sticky side. And it seems to be reasonably plastic. Now, size-wise, these things varied a lot. I've seen examples of maybe 6 inches tall, so it's not very big, up to 10 inches tall. And in fact, if you look at this, there's only a couple of things that seem to be common. They have this shape at the top where it flares out because they're supposed to kind of look like a bell. That's the idea. And obviously they're round and they usually are kind of curved on the outside like this. But I've seen some that were really kind of tall and narrow. I've seen others that were actually wider than they were tall. In this case, it looks to me like it's a little bit taller than it is wide. So the size is different, the shape's different. These pots were around for like 1,000 years all across Europe. And so you would expect to have a fair amount of variation in these things. So you may ask, well, what did they use these things for? And different reasons are different purposes, but they have found residue of beer and mead in a lot of them. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So they were drinking vessels. Now, were these vessels that people just had for hanging out at the pub and drinking, or were they ceremonial in some way? Of course, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it does seem that archaeologists like to think that many of these things are ritualistic. And maybe they are. I do not know. So I'm going to build this up and then add a couple coils to it. The other thing that is common to these things is the decoration. There's an external decoration. They were not painted. The little points, holes, they use a comb usually to do that. They use a corded tool. But geometric designs were common, I think, in all of these for the most part. Whether those decorations meant something, I have no clue. I have no idea at all. So I keep getting out of the camera area here. So I don't think they were any thinner than this. So I think I'm already about ready for a another coil. I don't like how it's really quite thick down at the bottom here. So I think I'm going to smooth this out just a little bit. The clay is pretty soft already. I've got to be careful about not adding too much water. But this will round it. It also, I'm kind of pushing it up a little bit, trying to thin it out, especially towards the bottom. One thing that occurred to me with this too, with Southwest pottery, you make it, get it all smoothed out, maybe slipped, and then you let it totally dry before you paint it. In this case, because of the incised decoration, that all has to be done while the pot is pretty soft. So can't let it get too hard, otherwise it's just not going to work. So you almost have to do this all in one go. And I have an idea how I want this to look when it's all said and done. But my experience is every time you make kind of a new form, it doesn't always turn out the way you want it to. It's almost like you have to ask the clay permission to make it into that shape. Because sometimes clay seems to have a mind of its own. All right, real basic little bowl there. So now the goal is to turn it into a jar. Kind of like my coil to make it all the way around the pot. I think this will. More than enough. I'm not sure, but it may be that I'm able to make this thing all with just one coil like this. My goal here is somewhere between 6 and 8 inches. I'm not going to worry about it too much. This clay is really pretty sticky. I'm not used to using this. I will put a link in the description to another build like this. There's a YouTube channel called Potted History. A gentleman comes out of England, and There were a lot of these pots that came from the British Isles, England, I think Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and he has a build in. His YouTube video is roughly an hour long, and he does a nice job of it. He's really good at this kind of stuff. You might want to check that out. So what I'm doing here is pinching in the inside to take care of any kind of seam that's in there. Then I'll start pulling this up. Okay, let's start working this up a little bit. I've always found that it's a good idea to not be too aggressive with this. Just take your time. And this is a pretty forgiving pot because the walls of it are traditionally apparently fairly thick. So you're not looking for a fine piece of art here. One thing that happens with me is, and I think a lot of people, is the pot starts to flare out. It's just kind of natural that way. So one thing you might do is keep the coil to the inside, but also use kind of a crimping pinch, kind of like I'm making a pleat almost, to get things to move in. What I'm doing is feeling to try to get the thickness of the pot consistent between my fingers. Again, I don't think it has to be perfect here. So it's looking a little bit on the lumpy side. So if I can smooth it out a little bit. So now what I'm trying to do is to get it to curve in a little. And then once it curves in, then I can get it to start flaring out. Okay, that's working. Do the same thing on the inside. So I'm pushing out a little bit to increase the amount of that outward curve. Okay, so far so good. I think that's all right. Well, I hope you notice that there aren't any ads in the middle of these videos. That's out of respect to you. But if you can make comments, give likes, subscriptions, all of that makes a difference. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you. See if we can get another coil on here. This could be the last one. So now we're going to try and build this so it curves out a little bit. It gets that bell-shaped flare. Now, I said that these things were frequently used for beer and ale. And if you had something like this that was 10 inches tall and say 6 or 8 inches wide, I don't know how much that would hold. But to me, that seems like a lot of beer. So, one of the things that's really interesting to me about these Bell Beaker people, one, the people are actually named after the pot. That doesn't seem to happen too often. That's kind of cool, I think. But they kind of took over Europe. Certainly took over Great Britain or England, the British Isles. There's genetic evidence that the people who were there first, the Paleolithic people, were largely displaced genetically by these Beaker people. So these Beaker people were buried, not typically cremated as I understand it, and they frequently had grave goods with them. And so these pots were part of the grave goods. Oftentimes they'd have 1 or 2 or occasionally more pots. The other thing that they frequently had with them was weapons. So it's hard to know exactly what really happened with these people and how one kind of took over the other. But I think they were farmers, had an agricultural culture, but they also had weapons. So who knows what really happened there, but they did take over. These pots were made for about 1,000 years, starting about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago is when they were making these pots. So in my mind, that's kind of a long time for a particular style of pot to be made. And so it's no surprise that there's a reasonable amount of variation in these things. Okay, so I'm just kind of pinching this up, thinning it out, and then I'm going to see what I can do to create this flare. Now this is a low-fired clay, so that's another similarity to the desert Southwest. So these pots were fired on probably a wood fire on the surface. They didn't have kilns, and we already talked about they didn't have pottery wheels. So these are hand built. And actually, if you look at the Native American pots where I live in Minnesota, I don't believe they were painted. They had decorations that were not that different than what we're seeing here. So they had incised decorations that were typically geometric. So I'm just trying to ease out the flare a little bit. It looks in the picture that the flare actually goes out wider than the body of the pot. I may need to add a little bit more clay here. Yep, I'm going to have to add some more clay. So to make this a little bit cleaner and easier, I'm going to cut off the top a little bit, get a straighter edge. And this next coil is not going to be very big. Yeah, that's good enough. While I have it in this condition, I'm going to see if I can use a scraper and push out the sides a little bit, make them a little bit more round. I can do it now because my hand fits inside pretty easily. All right, that's pretty good. All right, this is the last coil for sure. More than I need. Would have been easier if I would have had a little bigger coil last time. But it's all right. What this will do is give me enough clay to make the profile the way I want it. It's always nice to have a little more than you need. Get it pinched into the inside. This clay is kind of soft and sticky, so it's fairly easy to work with. I always like to take extra time with these seams. You don't want to have a crack unnecessarily. So let's thin this out. So in the picture, it has a fairly gentle flare to it. It's not severe, but I've seen some that really flared out heavily. I'll try to put some pictures along the way here so you can see some actual examples of these jars. It's very nice that some of them seem to survive pretty well considering that they're 4,000 or 5,000 years old. So this is what it looks like. It's pretty close. So what I'm going to do is clean up the top a little bit and just let it sit and firm up. And then I'll smooth it a little and just kind of watch how soft and hard it is. And then I can start with the decoration. My general plan is to get the decoration done, the whole pot done just today. So far it has taken me a little less than an hour, probably 45 minutes to get this far. So it's a pretty quick build. And tie height-wise, it's around 6 inches, so it's not real big, but this is a good way to start. The pot has been sitting most of the day. It's still pretty soft, and I think this is a good time to kind of smooth things out. And I'm not too worried about getting a real smooth finish on this. I'm not going to burnish it for sure. And I think just using a scraper for the most part will do the job. And then I'll let it dry just a little bit more. I think we just have to test it out by hand, I guess. Then it's about ready to make the impressions on it. It's certainly still soft enough. My biggest concern is waiting so long that the clay gets just too firm to manipulate. I think the pot is as smooth as it really needs to be. It's not great, but I think for this kind of pot, that's kind of the way it was. And so now it's time to put the design on. And I made some different combs. So these are just pieces of wood that what I did is I used a triangular file to file out the little notches. And that the idea is to imprint those in the clay. You could just make one dot at a time, but it would be difficult to get straight lines, and it would take you pretty much forever. I can't imagine how many dots there are. Thousands, I think. So here is a more or less design. These things varied quite a lot, but it was real common to see lines that went around the circumference of the pot. These are kind of like chevrons and zigzags and hatched in. So there's a lot of variation to it. I don't think there's a wrong way to do this. So I'm just going to give it a go and see what happens. And what I did is I curved these a little bit. I think it'll be a little bit easier to make the marks. We'll see. I think it also makes sense to support it on the inside so you don't cave the thing in. But so far, I think that looks pretty good. And I'm not going to have you sit and watch me do this because it's going to take some time. But I think what I'm going to do is make some horizontal lines first and then fill those in different ways with zigzags and hatching and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's Number 1 is done. Looks like I probably should have one at the top. The clay is starting to dry out a little bit on the top too, which is not unusual. It's probably obvious that you just put one of your notches in the last hole so that it all lines up. It's not exactly an exacting process here. That's the beauty of this particular project. I kind of have the freedom just to go for it because it is not expected to be fine art. So that feels pretty good. Try and get these to line up reasonably well. All right, so I'm going to shut the camera off and do some things, and I will come back later and show you what I end up with. Here we are so far. I found it is useful to have different size combs because sometimes you want to make a short line, but other times you want to make a longer one, and this will save you time. Ideally, the size of the comb is about the same in terms of the spacing, but I don't think it makes that much difference. If you aren't able to finish the decoration, one thing you can do is cover it in a plastic bag. Or if it's going to be overnight, you might want to wrap it up even a little bit better. And it'll just help it from drying out, but it will still firm up. So I'm getting really close with this, and so it's time to put the final touches on. So once you get kind of far down, I think it's probably easiest to flip this thing upside down. Because what I see is that they tend to decorate pretty close to the bottom. So I don't have a lot further to go here. And I will be done. You know, this is a fun project, and it took roughly an hour to build the pot. And all total, somewhat more than an hour, I suppose, to make the decoration. It's hard to say. I kind of like that it's just not all that sophisticated. And once I got started on the design, I just kind of did what seemed to be the right thing to do. I don't think it matters that much. I think what I will do, though, is run a scraper on the inside and try and push it out a little bit. I think I've probably indented it a little bit with my impressions here. Okay, let's put on one more row here just for fun. Okay, I would call this thing done. A little bit on the wonky side, but I don't think that matters at all with this kind of a project. There you have it, a Bell Beaker pot. I think it's a doable project for almost any of us. So please give it a try and let me know how you do. Thanks for being here, and until next time, this is Wes, wishing you health, happiness, peace, and love. Take care. Bye-bye.